All right, welcome to this webinar this morning. My name is Jeffrey Can, and today's webinar, we're going to deal with a very important topic related to carbon, methane, and premium markets, and they are actually linked. This session is called From Estimates to Evidence, Unlocking Premium Markets with Verified Emissions Data. Joining me today are two professionals who are leading the charge in this arena, having just announced a partnership to collaborate on bringing the solutions to market to help organizations capture the opportunity presented by better quality emissions data. And we're going to talk through why this is an opportunity for the industry, what's driving it, how companies can go about and take advantage of it and capitalize on it. So joining me today is David Stewart. He is the president of Sendero Services, calling in from Denver, Colorado this morning. David, welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, Jeffrey, and good morning, everyone.
And also joining live from Barcelona, beautiful city, is Juan Perez, who is the CEO of Finboot. Juan, welcome.
Thank you, Jeffrey, and hello, everyone.
Of course, I'm coming to you live from Vancouver. So we assembled a global panel because carbon knows no borders. It is a truly international phenomenon and challenge and at the same time opportunity. The session is going to run about 45 minutes. I have a bunch of questions I'm going to pose to Juan and Dave to kind of unpack the questions here and the opportunity. The recording at the end of this session will be made available. We're going to take questions throughout. If you've got one, by all means, just drop it in the comment box on the StreamYard interface, and we'll pick it up and I'll address it to either Dave or Juan. If you want to address the question to either of them, just put their name in the question, and that'll be my cue as to who should take the question on. Terrific. So let me start with just a few remarks. So oil and gas operators, I've grown up in the oil and gas industry. Operators work really, really hard globally to comply with emissions regulations. But to be blunt, the vast majority of the reporting of carbon emissions, that's either CO2s, methanes, even other gases, off gases from production. They generally rely on estimates and emissions factors. They're not actuals, and because of that, this creates a specific challenge for putting appropriate pricing on the carbon products, petroleum products produced, because you're estimating what their emissions profile might be versus what there actually is, and so you're potentially being either charged a penalty or you're not capturing enough value based on how your product is priced. There's a bunch of reasons for this. It's fragmented data across the whole value chain, just the history of the industry, the lack of regulations that specified it needed to be in actuals. Well, this is no longer good enough in many jurisdictions. Europe has announced the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, which is a regulatory protocol which will penalize those organizations that are producing carbon and help level a playing field between European and non-European manufacturers. Buyers in Asia and other markets actually are very much prepared to pay a premium for high quality, low carbon gas and petroleum products if they can source it. And the challenge, of course, is producers really struggle to move from this traditional method of estimates to actuals. And it's the fragmented data, the inconsistencies of measurement all are getting in the way. Well, Sendero and Finboot have partnered up to try and crack through this problem by tying together actual field data measurement, which is a Sendero specialty, with a digital product passport, which will take the data from the sensors and then move it through the value chain so that buyers of the product at the other end have assurance as to what the actual carbon profile is of that particular product. And so what I want to talk to today through this webinar is to unpack this. Like why are we doing this? What's the upside and the prize here? All set? And as I say, if you've got questions, just drop them in the comment box. We'll take them live as we go. So Dave, let me start with you. Why is emissions historically being based on estimates and not actuals?
Sure. Well, emissions calculations have been embedded in the oil and gas industry for decades. Subpart W reporting in the U.S. actually required certain emission factors to be used, and still does. Well, since it's been retracted lately, but basically these emission factors were deemed by EPA and had to be used in the Subpart W reporting. So there was no benefit to really actually doing field measurement for a long time. With recent changes, there has been benefit in several areas, but really the emission factor based approach has been historically what's been used.
So we've heard a little bit already now that there's some changes in the regulatory framework in the U.S. So it's on or off depending on the stance of the administration. In this case, the latest administration is peeling those back. But that's not the case in Europe, is it, Juan? I mean, regulations like CBAM and OGMP2 are in fact in force or coming into force.
Yeah, I think, look, to be completely realistic, 2025 has been a strange year for European regulation as well. The long-term vision and kind of the firm commitment continues to be moving towards decarbonization, prioritizing and introducing more restrictions or requirements on non-financial reporting, and making organizations more accountable on their emissions as well, right? And particularly how that travels down the supply chain, and how essentially for a truly clean industry, you need to start collecting this information and having that emissions data travel throughout the value chain so that it becomes useful for those stakeholders that are downstream of you, right? So at a high level and looking at the next kind of 2 to 3 years of implementation deadlines, that continues to be the trajectory that we are here in Europe. Again, things like CBAM is a great example of that, because it hits very much in the priorities that the current European government has, which is competitiveness and the energy transition, right? So what CBAM is trying to do is strengthen the competitiveness of our local industrial stakeholders by preventing carbon leakage, right? And therefore, we don't need to sacrifice our sustainability agendas in order to create a more competitive landscape, right? And as I said, well, 25, one of the major changes in 25 is the clock was stopped on CBAM to reconsider again some of the resources that needed to be in place in order for the regulation to be applied more consistently. It's still on the table. It's still happening. It should still be a major concern for any energy stakeholder for whom the European market is important.
So they're slowing down the deployment of the regulation, but there's no discussion at all that says the regulation is not going to come into force. This is strictly a question of timing, as opposed to is it coming? Exactly. Yeah. What additional data does the regulations in Europe require that beyond what is normally made available, besides these emissions factors and calculations?
Yeah. So I think it's not so much additional data, but rather more granular data, right? So again, historically, you could have done with yearly reporting, maybe quarterly reporting, and this type of things. What CBAM changes is essentially that, again, crossing the border for these commodities becomes a transaction where information on the actual goods that are moving into the European market need to come with that information already embedded, right? So the emission data becomes a matter of kind of almost a per batch or per product element, as opposed to an accounting exercise that is done on a longer, let's say, time frame. Yeah. This is granularity
angle, I think, here is the most important feature of this. Granular and actuals. Granular and actuals is really the dimension. I mentioned already at the start that there is a premium market opportunity here. I understand from other sources that markets in Europe who are, say, wishing to blend products together to achieve a lower carbon intensity will pay a significant premium for low carbon blendable product. What is any sense as to the scale of that opportunity?
So I think that the reality is, again, manufacturers in Europe are being pressured to decarbonize themselves, right? The only way they do that is by looking at their energy consumption, right? They need to look at their raw materials as well. But again, things like gas and hydrogen are always going to be part of these, particularly capital-intensive industries like steel, automotive, or industrial manufacturing in general, right? So when they are being forced by both market and regulator to decarbonize, they need to find lower carbon footprint energy products as well, right? And when markets push them to decarbonization, it's because those markets are also paying premiums on those lower carbon footprint products, right? That moves up, right? Because essentially they also need to pay more for those feedstocks that are lower carbon. They recognize that, and they're committing to that as well, right? So because the whole ecosystem is now being set up to move in that direction, right? Ultimately, the accuracy of the data is super important for these manufacturers because they need to prove those claims in the market as well, right? If they're saying we're using low carbon gas to produce or to power our facilities, they need to be able to demonstrate that to their buyers. And the risk here is if they don't have the data to back up their claims, then ultimately their products need to be sold as kind of full emissions market, and that loses the entire profit that these producers can have in those circular or low carbon products, because essentially you're paying for a more expensive feedstock, but you're not able to sell that as a more expensive product, right? And that's where the demand then is going to come to the energy producers you have to give me not just the data, but you have to give me accurate data. And you have to give me the information as I receive the commodity, not at a later reporting date.
Dave, what is the situation in the U.S. or perhaps more broadly the North American market? What does the premium market opportunity here look like, do you think?
Well, it's very much in the development phase right now. With the adaptation of AI throughout the world, there's going to be a very much increasing need for power generation to drive these data centers. The data centers, their primary customers are the large tech companies who have made major climate goals. And so, previously the government played a big role here in the US. That's been decreased lately. But I think that the international markets and the markets are all concerned about climate change still. And so users of power, like Juan said, whether it be cement, steel, data centers, you name it, they're all getting pressure to reduce their carbon footprint. And so I think it's going to shift from a government-based sort of need or requirement to accurately report these emissions to even more granular from the private industry and more auditable. And so that's what Juan and I are trying to achieve.
Yeah. My sense is that certainly the hyperscalers, this is the Amazons of the world building their data centers, is that they are prepared to pay, given that they've made very, very clear, very public commitments to be carbon neutral by certain target dates, 2030, for example. They're prepared to pay a premium in order to secure the product they need to demonstrate that they're achieving those goals. And I think that premium market is real, alive and well in the United States, not just in across North America, not just in Europe. Dave, this has been a hard problem to solve for years. I know you've dedicated a career to tackling this. Why is it a change to becoming something you can actually solve now?
Well, I think that's an interesting question, but the relief from Subpart W actually allows the industry to report emissions more accurately. The Subpart W reporting was rife with problems, over-reporting in certain areas, under-reporting in other areas, lacking certain sources that weren't reported. Scope 2, Scope 3 were not even really included greatly. So I think really now privatizing this effort will actually allow more innovation and strategic reporting that then will be audited by people that know how to do this and can really drill down into what actually are these emissions, are they being reported accurately, and are all the emission sources included?
Yeah, it's been certainly the scope 1 emissions are relatively clear cut to grab. It's the scope 2 and scope 3 that are particularly vexatious here. That's just the challenges. There's a question here on LinkedIn. Someone has sent in. I'll just read that out in case you can't see it. There's always been a bit of worry about sharing things like detailed emissions data. How can we be sure we're protected and not opening ourselves up to surprises from regulators or the public? Dave, I wonder if you might, we'll start with that, and then Juan, I'll have you comment on it as well.
Sure, that is a big concern for project developers and folks that emit. There's different ways to report data. For instance, you have to get air permits here in the US for all your emissions. If your emissions inventory reporting differentiates from your permitting, you could have a problem there. So it's important for oil and gas operators in particular to reconcile those differences and ensure that the emissions data lines up to their permitted emissions so that they're under those, so they don't end up into a regulatory bind. The other thing is just public perception, but there's a void there. The public perceives what they perceive, and if you don't base an inventory on actual data, then they're going to assume the worst. And actually you see the public thinking that we're emitting more than we are. So I think it's helpful for operators to be granular, be auditable in their emissions reporting, such that when criticism does come in from regulators or public, it can be defended.
Juan, what is your perspective on this? This is really about data security, privacy, and that sort of thing. What is the European view of this question?
I think, of course, kind of data security and trust is a priority, and it's a major concern, right? So how do we protect our information, and how do we make sure that our claims are backed up by evidence, right? Now, technology can help with this, of course, right? And it's all about how do we then deploy a system where we're always in control of our data, and we always have control over who can see our information, right? And that's certainly, and I'm not going to get into any of the technicalities there, but that's not a technological challenge, right? And I think on the other side of that picture is what might backfire is actually not opening up this information and this data to your stakeholders, right? Because again, we go back to the premium market opportunity. Buyers are not going to be willing to pay those premiums unless they see the data that backs it up, right? Because ultimately that's what they're paying for, right? You got to make sure that I'm not being misled here, right? And if we focus too much and we got to have a closed system and our data cannot travel outside of our organization, then ultimately that may be your decision, but you're sacrificing access to these premium markets, which could be very enticing for your organization as well, right?
Yeah, I think there's an angle too here, which is a public perception. Dave, I think you actually touched on it earlier, but things like the carbon markets where people buy and trade carbon credits have shown that some of those credits have been pretty wonky and not very suspect. And the lack of transparency does create this public perception that there's some smoke and mirrors going on here. It's not really being transparent and truthful. So
it very much goes back to the quality of the data, Geoffrey, right? So again, what has happened in some of those cases, and it's been thoroughly reported, is there was fraud, you didn't have the information, and particularly from what has happened in those carbon markets, carbon credits markets in particular, is that now the same buyers of these low carbon energy products are the buyers that used to get into those carbon credit markets as well. They were burned because they didn't do their due diligence well enough when it came to looking at that data. They learned that lesson, they have that experience. When it comes to new low carbon or renewable or circular products, now they are asking the hard questions up front, right? So before the cash goes in, I actually need to see the
Yeah,
evidence.
really.
Part of that comes from their experience.
Yeah, show me the money, which brings us full circle now to why Sendero and Finboot have struck up this collaboration. Dave, I'll start with you here. What is the partnership meant to accomplish, and specifically help companies move from estimates to evidence?
Sure. Well, Finboot offers a really solid reporting platform, something that Sendero can't or does not want to do. And we know that the quality of the data entering that system is of utmost importance to Juan and his users at the end. Mm-hmm. And so where we come in is verifying boots on the ground implementation, actual field measurement, supporting emission factors through data-based and science-based approaches such that these numbers are defendable. And I think Juan's platform with the blockchain and all that, and how those are reported in through a digital passport is quite unique. And we're just super excited to be partnered with him and help him with the boots on the ground type of work to really make sure that the data that's going into his system from new customers is quality and that it can be audited and it supports the differentiated gas market.
What exactly does Sendero do in the context here? Is it provision of is it the services? Is it the third-party measurement of the data? Is it the verification of the data? What's the prize or the value here from Sendero's side?
Yeah, it's actually quite boring, to be honest with you. What we do is we go out and we physically count the equipment. Let's say it's an oil and gas site. We go out and we inventory the number of separators, the number of valves, fittings, and all those things that go into the emission inventory. We directly measure methane emissions with high flow samplers, turbine meters, other measurement devices that are OGMP 5.0 derived. And we back up the information with real boots on the ground type of auditable data. So it does get kind of boring, but that's essentially what's needed to really get down to the granularity it's needed to support a differentiated gas market and really back up who's paying more for what.
Yeah. So I think the angle here, which is may at least what drives the need for the boots on the ground emphasis, is the fact that the range of technologies used in oil and gas is so diverse. And much of it is old, dates back to before literally we had the internet. Some of the equipment is still running, and so it requires that level of expertise to actually go count and be able to, through experience, say there's likely to be an emission or a flare here because of that experience. And I think that's the Sendero story here, which is that boots on the ground, third-party, independent, verified data and its origins. Juan, Dave has mentioned this. The collection of the data is one thing, but unless you can carry it all the way through the market, it's not. You don't put any value at the other end. How does the digital passport feature from Finboot accomplish this goal?
Yeah. So it's basically what happens before the digital passport, right? Which is that digital traceability element, right? So we use technology. The whole platform is powered by blockchain technology, which gives us a tamper-proof, auditable system of record for that data, for that chain of custody, and for that chain of events that is going to happen, right? So ultimately, that traceability platform can give you that auditable and secure environment for your information. What we do then on top of that traceability platform is then unlock that functionality of a digital product passport, but it's a digital product passport that is essentially taking data that is anchored on a blockchain ledger, on a blockchain database, and essentially then putting that in a way that is more easy to interact with or to share with the customers, the regulators, or other stakeholders in that value chain. While at the same time, over that passport, you always have full control of who can actually see the data, who can actually access it, how can I block from, let's say, an indiscriminate sharing of my proprietary information, right? So all of those controls, along with that auditable chain of custody, right? And again, where we see like the perfect match here. It's that essentially in the traceability platform that we've created, one of the biggest challenges or one of the biggest gaps is the source of the information, right? So very simply put, and this has been widely discussed, right? You garbage in, garbage out, right? So if the data that is coming through, it's not being thoroughly validated or it's not supported by evidence, again, you're just auditing information that was wrong to begin with, right? So being very picky, to put it very colloquially, on what information can actually come into the system, that's key for us, right? In other manufacturing ecosystems, we managed to do this through system integrations. Again, without getting into the technicals, it's easier to connect to some facilities that are already fairly digitized, right? So when it goes to energy production, you said it yourself, Geoffrey, the diversity of systems and the age of those systems brings in that requirement where we actually need boots on the ground services like Sendero, as you guys both mentioned, to actually secure that information and bring verified, credible info into the ecosystem.
And so visually, or as I'm a very pedantic person sometimes. My wife accuses me of this. I'll just paint my story here. I see the boots on the ground, collecting, verifying, and building the data profile actuals of what's going on at the site. Dave, that's what we've talked about. That data is then recorded and captured immutably on a record on blockchain powered by Finboot. And a trader, someone who is, say, in Texas somewhere, looking to purchase gas to feed into a liquefied natural gas plant to ship to Europe to capture a European market, would be able to pull up that passport and say, this gas originated at this site, and here's all of the actual data that's come from that. Is that the concept here that people should have in their heads?
I agree with that. You hit the nail on the head.
Yeah, I think that's the vision. And if we do that, then I think we do see the possibility of that the market being able to pay for that and being willing to pay for that value. There's another question out on the comment line here. Let me just read this off. If we invest in these measurement and tracking systems now, I think Dave will address this one to you because it is about start with the data tracking side. How do we know they'll still meet whatever new rules are going to pop up somewhere down the track?
Well, I think the simple answer is you never know what rules are going to pop up down the line. I mean, it's a very dynamic world we live in and very dynamic politically. So there is no guarantees. But what I would say around measurement and tracking is that there's a reality there of what emissions are, and that's through measurement and science. And you can't change that no matter what the regulations are that require the reporting of that.
Yeah, physics or physics.
Yeah, the basics is there. If you have an emission rate and it's proven through science-based measurement and tracked legitimately through systems that protect that data from corruption, there's really not much that can be argued with there at that point, no matter what regulation pops up. Unless they just don't require it at all, which isn't the case right now. I think we've all seen this is continuing. There's continuing need for efforts to reduce our impact on the climate, and I don't think that's going away.
Juan, what is your perspective here?
Well, I think Dave kind of nailed it in saying that basically we must assume and own up to the fact that we don't know what's coming, right? That's got to be a fact. And then with that in mind, then what we need is to do investments that, of course, are science-based, but that are also flexible and are able to evolve to accommodate new requirements, right? So, and that's something that's particularly key from a digital traceability standpoint, which is, again, you need to find a solution that is flexible enough so that it can evolve, that it can accommodate new regulations, new requirements, or that it can also evolve to how a single regulation is changing, right? So we briefly discussed it at the beginning, but things like CBAM, once it went into force, things started changing, right? So just because of this very dynamic world that we live in that Dave mentioned, we need to make sure that our investments have the same dynamism, right? They have the same capability to kind of evolve as our reality changes. And I think we're not getting away from that. Like that's very much the case. So we just need to understand and basically plan accordingly.
For those who are unfamiliar with blockchain or immutable ledger technologies, Juan, one of the sort of aspects of this question that might be perplexing is just how rigid are these databases, these blockchain style databases, to where if the rules do change, the rigidity that you've built in somehow blocks your ability to adapt. They're not that rigid, are they?
They're not. I mean, and it's a good kind of interlink into, again, you have a tamper-proof database, that's for sure. So you can not change the past, and that's one of the strongest elements that it has. But it's also a very programmable database, right? So you can actually then change the code that is running within it so that data in the future can behave or be managed in a different way, right? So and being able to update and then alter the behavior moving forward is one of the key key characteristics, let's say, that these systems can give you.
Another interesting question has popped up on the comment line from James, who I happen to know. Hi, James. Thank you for this one. Energy markets in North America, when you're shipping from North America to Europe, I'll just rephrase the question given the length of it. Some gases going into the liquefied natural gas cargoes are spot and maybe anonymous and will be blended. And there's also midstream data that has to be taken into account, as well as pipeline data, as manufacturing facilities. How does this solution solve for that problem? Dave, any perspective? I mean, surely my suspicion would be measurement of boots on the ground is not just restricted to boots on the ground at a production facility. It could also operate at a midstream asset.
It's a great question and a hard one to answer, I'll be honest, but I think the spot purchases have to be driven by the buyer. So if the buyer's open to spot purchases and those are not auditable from a greenhouse gas supply chain perspective, then it's going to be reported as is. So they'll be purchasing a higher intensity product.
Yeah.
So it's binary. So if the buyer demands a low carbon fuel, then those spot purchases could be audited and tracked from the source, which is something we can do. We can go out and get the data from that particular supplier and help make that more granular and help report that more accurately. But it's a tough question.
Yeah. It's Juan, go ahead.
No, if I may add a bit, I mean, it certainly kind of tells to the complexity of the kind of the energy value chain in general. Things that we've seen kind of navigate, or ways that we've seen on how to navigate this complexity in within the same industry but in different products is essentially by adapting or implementing different chain of custody models, right? So again, the ideal scenario is we have either a segregated or identity preservation value chain, whereas we go from the producer, that data is captured there, we secure that information, and that data and the commodity travel independently to the buyer, right? We know, and the question posted very well, that's often not the reality of the energy value chain or the oil and gas value chain. But that's why that very industry has introduced chain of custody models like mass balance or book and claim, where you can essentially start playing on, okay, I may not have molecular traceability, but I guarantee the input. So I guarantee that at the source, the information was correct. That low carbon gas was produced and that low carbon gas was put on the market. There comes the blending, there comes some of those midstream players and so on. But then I decouple the avoided emissions from that commodity, from the actual molecules of gas that are moving through these pipelines or these systems. And then it's a commercial agreement, right? So while the LNG that you may be receiving at a port here in Europe might not be molecularly the same that was produced somewhere in the US, the low carbon benefit of that LNG, it is being sold to you, right? And this is something that that is happening in the industry across many low carbon, renewable, and circular products, because they face the same issue, right? So that's very much a way that we can perhaps navigate this in this space as well.
Yeah, and I think the back to James' question, the prize here is probably to think about this as demand pull rather than regulator push. You know, if the market can see a clear value proposition from an enhanced premium for product, then the market should mobilize to say, let's capture that premium and go after it. Gas markets in Canada, for instance, over the late summer were actually negative. You had to pay people to take your gas, and this is a product that Europeans pay a premium for. So if for those companies that want to, say, secure those markets, a demand pull might actually be the way to figure this out. Start with the customer and work backwards, and that can help mobilize the supply chain to participate in this. Another question from also online. At the end of the day, we're all dependent on the buyer for the continued success. Does the partnership, does Finboot, for instance, have buyers who are committed to purchase if the tech and the data cater to their requests? Are there actual markets out there? Juan, can you comment on this? Are there companies that you're aware of that are prepared to purchase?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. Like, just to be transparent, we're not intermediaries or traders.
No, you're not traders. No.
Exactly. But our customers are purchasing these low carbon energy products already, of course, independently of Finboot. But they do so because that's part of what we are tracing. The consumption of those energy products is part of what we are tracing for them, as they used it to produce, again, steel, aluminum, automotive components, and so on, right? So there's certainly a market, right? Again, we're not a trader in this space, but there is appetite for these products in Europe for sure.
Yeah, sustainable aviation fuel is a terrific example. The aviation companies cannot secure anything close to the volume of SAF that they require. And if you were able to demonstrate that your fuel has a lower carbon footprint, you can capture a premium market very, very quickly, I think.
Yeah, the same thing is going to happen in the biomethane. Well, it's going to happen in the methane space, right? So whereas that's why biomethane is growing, production of biomethane is growing in Europe, is because the volumes that the regulator demands for consumption, again, far exceed the capacity that there is at the moment, right? So it's essentially like in SAF, everything that you can produce, you have a guarantee premium and a guarantee selling of those commodities.
Let me turn to the proposition here that operators should be kind of framing in their head, the value proposition of this partnership. What's in it for them, and how should they see the benefits? Dave, I'll start with you. If you were to meet with an operator, how do you frame the benefit here for the operator to think about this collaboration?
Well, the benefit's really being able to offer their production to a differentiated market to get more value for their product. That's the bottom line, and the steps that we take are not meant to be overly burdensome. It's meant to look at the inventory, see how well it's done, provide a third-party opinion on that, so that the data that goes into Juan's system is auditable, and that's the bottom line. And we're developing AI tools to do that at speed, so that this isn't a very intrusive situation unless the emission factors are very off, and then we'd report that back and be able to help an operator improve their emission inventory to the point where it can be on the market in a differentiated gas or oil situation.
And Juan, over to you now. When you meet with companies who are interested in this, how do you frame the benefits to them in a similar fashion, or is there additional features or aspects you'd highlight?
I think it comes, again, we work with the consumers of that energy who are themselves creating new products that also have premiums in the market, right? So to them, it's also about basically the value they are going to capture from their own markets, right? So that's, I think, we always try to find an equation where it's in the end it's win-win, and there's more benefit and more value to be gained within these low carbon and sustainable markets, than by playing against them, right? That's an element of it, right? So making sure, look, your consumption of low energy products is going to pay off because of the premium markets that your products are going to then go to. That's something that in the automotive industry, they're already starting to see the pressure, because OEMs are now pressuring the supply chain, not just to compete on price, which they've always historically done, but now to compete on carbon as well, right? So you're going to give me this number of components, and you're going to have each of them be of a carbon footprint lower than X, right? And in order to decarbonize those auto parts, they need to decarbonize their energy sources, right? So that pressure from their own buyers is already there. And on the other hand, again, you have the direction of the regulatory landscape, right? So the regulatory landscape is moving towards decarbonization. In order to achieve those decarbonization targets, we need to get more creative with the information that we're getting and how we're then justifying or doing our own internal carbon accounting based on a lot of the emission data on the energy products that we are consuming.
There's a question here online from Julia, who asks, what level of granularity in emissions verification is required to influence pricing dynamics and then qualify products for a premium market? I don't know if I personally don't have a perspective on the granularity dimension of it. Dave, let me just sort of direct this to you. Have companies flagged to you the need for granularity of data at a specific level?
Well, I think it's the granularity question is up to the buyer, really, at the end of the day. But there's best practices out there defined like by OGMP 2.0 and what they're trying to achieve. There's best practices out there on emissions inventory development. And these are based on two very specific things. And that is, did you actually count the equipment that you have in the field? Do you know what your inventory is? And then are your emission factors that you're using or your emissions you're reporting based on actual verified methane measured data? And I think those are the two very important pieces. Now, do you have to count every single site? No, but you have to have a good understanding of what your sites are and a very much of an assurance that what you're reporting is accurate.
Let's turn to some challenges that might exist out there. Companies might think to themselves, "Well, I'll just go build my own system. Why would I do this?" Let's understand why a partnership like this actually it presents them with a better alternative. Dave, how would you respond to that? Like, why go with this partnership rather than build your own?
Well, it's already built. Finboot put a lot of time and money into building this system, and it's being used today, and it's being recognized internationally. So I think to start from scratch is doable, but it's very difficult, and it'll cost more money at the end of the day. So I think that this partnership really allows operators of oil and gas properties and other producers of energy to really utilize what's already out there and utilize an internationally recognized platform such as Finboot.
Yeah, I'd offer up in response to that question too, that there's a risk or a perception potentially that a company that presents all of its own data on its own systems and so forth may be viewed as not being sufficiently transparent. Using a third party to derive and verify the data actually is a value proposition in its own right. Juan, what is your sense? I mean, you've spent years building the platform. How fast can the solution be deployed at a company if they so chose to proceed?
Yeah, and that's another one of our kind of key values, right? And it links to what they said of, well, we've already built the solution. We've built a highly configurable solution as well. That means that we can get operational anywhere between 8 to 12 weeks in very complex supply chains, right? So in simple compliance processes, we can actually, we've productized that a lot more, but in very complex supply chain processes like the ones we've discussed today, 8 to 12 weeks, that's your implementation window, right? So that's unmatched by anyone that's going to build a bespoke system.
Yeah.
That wouldn't even get you to the start of that, right? So again, the fact that we've consistently done this with multiple players in the oil and gas, in the chemicals, and in the metal space. It basically shows that credibility and that capacity that we have to deploy these systems in such a kind of an expedited way.
How secure, are these systems, the Finboot database, for instance, from cyber attacks and hacking activity and the like?
Yeah, again, we've got a documented, well-certified, audited system by third parties as well, so we can share a lot of that information in terms of kind of what are our credentials in that space, but it very much has basically industry critical certifications that we need, because our existing customers would not be using the platform unless we were able to prove that, right? But
yeah,
we've got a lot of information that we can share with basically interested stakeholders to support that.
Data sovereignty comes up now as a hot topic, Dave. I mean, the data that's coming off of the site, who owns that data? Is that presume that's the owner or the operator's data? That's not your data at the end of the day.
Yeah, correct. That's the operator's data. We just do verification.
Yeah, just do the verification collection of it. Yeah, so from a sovereignty standpoint, there's not a risk here that somehow your data is going to be used inappropriately. It's specifically for the company itself and its purposes.
No, everything we collect on a site becomes the property of the owner of the site.
Yep. A couple of other questions have popped up on the chat comment line here. Let's see. Another one from James. Can we quantify what the premiums or discounts might be? Should we expect to see variations in premiums across different buying verticals? Juan, what is, I'll sort of turn that to you. Have you seen evidence in what the premium is, say, that companies will pay for a certified gas?
We have, and we have access both to kind of generalized market data, but also specific information. Nothing that I'm too comfortable sharing right now live.
Uh-huh.
But I think we should have James' contact details, and I can reach out and probably provide, again, some of those general materials on market information we can share for sure. Others, we may need to kind of check what we can actually disclose.
Well, certainly, I've for my own data, for what it's worth, the price spread between a certified bio diesel product or a biogas product in Europe, a fully sustainable sourced product, compared to a fossil fuel-based product, the spread can be quite considerable depending on the market dynamics at the time. With pricing double and triple what you would normally get for your original product, so the spread can be quite significant. Let's turn to now, we're kind of running into our 45-minute mark, and I wanted to make sure we wrap up quickly here. Let's turn to this, what I call the call to action now. How will premium markets reward buyers here, sellers here, producers with verified data? Juan, what have you seen in Europe? How does the market react when you are known as a supplier of clean carbon products?
Again, because of the appetite for those products, it very much secures your position in the market, right? So like buyers are looking for those low carbon energy products, and they are not, at the moment, they're not too available in the market, right? So if you can position yourself in that way, there's certainly an interest to then prioritize you as a supplier of energy.
And Dave, in the North American context, what's the opportunity, the reward here that producers should be anticipating if they can be perceived as the premium supplier of low carbon, high quality petroleum products?
Well, I think the bottom line is the differentiated gas market is emerging in North America, the U.S. in particular. And so those folks that are providing that differentiated gas or oil will have better access to market, more consistent pricing opportunities for upticks in pricing, and a better corporate reputation as well, which will help them in all facets of their business development and how they expand and continue to operate in the U.S.
Julia online asks a great question. It's probably the question to end with, which is, until buyers are prepared to pay that premium, how do you justify the full scale deployment here? I mean, what's the call to action that you would call to? Dave, I'll start with you. What is the call to action here, given that, as you point out, the market's emerging? It's not it's not something you can point at and characterize as being in full force. What's the prize here, the call to action?
Yeah, I think that there has to be trust that the market is emerging. We're seeing large corporate entities having net zero goals or having, goals on emissions reduction. And that's going to be accomplished in a couple different ways. One being decreasing your own carbon footprint, and the second being buying carbon offsets in the market. Carbon offsets in the market are increasing every year over year. You see more people buying them, and those have to be based on verified emissions data as well. So I think the justification really for large scale investment, and this doesn't have to be a large scale investment, by the way, it can be relatively small investment to get ahead of what's coming. And I think it's really important for companies to look forward to the future and understand that the differentiated gas market is coming. And unless these net zero goals go away, which I don't see happening, there's no way for them to meet them unless they have differentiated gas and oil.
And Juan, what do you see as the call to action here? Is this really a big, heavy lift, large scale deployment effort, or is something much lighter here at play?
Yeah, no, that's exactly the point, right? So I think in the question it said like large scale investments in digital traceability. Oh. That is not the case, and if anything, I would say you shouldn't do large scale investments in digital traceability, because it is a space where you have ready-made solutions that are really suitable for deploy, and that's kind of the exploration that I would encourage you to do, right? These are not significant investments, and in fact, when you compare it to the opportunity in the market, these are very much kind of small investments, right? So I think the call to action here is, look, if you're really ready to kind of take a first step, we'd be happy to then have a deeper conversation, an assessment, and then understand or rather explain to you how a potential piloting of this solution could play out, and get more into the details of, hey, what are those margins and what is the return of investment of something like this, right?
Yeah, it certainly doesn't sound to me like a heavy lift. Visiting the site and doing the inventory, counting the devices and measuring the gas, companies already do that. So it's just that this is in many jurisdictions it's a requirement. So Dave, this is really about doing it in a more thoughtful and thorough manner. The database already exists, and if there's a buyer out there, that you could pull this program through deployment within the year. This is not a multi-year heavy lift, hard to accomplish thing. This is something that could deliver very, very fast turnaround. Dave and Juan, thank you very much for coming on the webinar today. This has been a really interesting conversation about this estimates to evidence concept and capturing premium markets. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeffrey, and thank you, Juan.
I'll bring the webinar to a close, as there's still lots of questions on the queue here. We're just not going to get to them all, but we've taken note of them all. If your name is attached to them, we'll be able to follow up with you directly. Look for the recording of this webinar online by visiting Sendero or Finboot, and you'll be able to share this content with others in your organization who may be equally curious about the opportunity here. And look forward to a subsequent webinar where we talk further about this whole opportunity of capturing premium markets. Again, thank you very much for your time today, and bye for now.